Hi, welcome to this episode of Faith and Logic. In this episode of Faith and Logic, we are going to discuss about the laws of logic, the basic fundamental laws of logic. We are going to talk about the definitions, examples, and also a biblical foundations for it. So let's look at the definition of logic. The textbook definition of logic is an instrument of human knowledge as a discipline. It involves the study of the science and art of right reasoning that directs the faculty of reasoning to enable one to advance with order, ease, and correctness in the acts of reason. So, in a simple terms, logic is the study of correct reasoning and valid inference. It follows established rules of inference for moving from premises to a conclusion. For example, all men are mortals. Bob is a man and therefore Bob is mortal. So, what we have done is that we took two premises that all men are mortal. Then the second premise is that Bob is a man and therefore Bob is mortal. So, that is how we use the logic. Logic is the study of correct reasoning and valid inference. It basically moving from premises to the conclusion. Aristotle is often called the father of logic. Logic is foundational across many different faculties like philosophy, mathematics, theology, and also in our daily life. Logic helps distinguish between sound arguments and fallacies. So there are some bad arguments, and in an order to identify if the argument is sound or not, we need to use logic. It is a framework that governs clear thinking and consistency. It also reflects God's rational and truthful nature because God created us human being in his own image. There is a difference between a human being and an animal. An animal has a soul and a body, but animals do not reason, whereas we human beings have a capability of reasoning, and that reflects God's rational and truthful nature. Now, let's look at the first basic fundamental law of logic, and that is the law of non-contradiction. This is very often used laws of logic, the law of non-contradiction. So the definition says nothing can both be and not be at the same time and in the same respect. We are going to look at all three laws of logic in a form of existence, essence, and the truth value. So the existence is that nothing can both be and not be at the same time. So, in other words, A cannot be A and non A at the same time. If we want to see as a truth value, a statement cannot be both true and not true at the same time and in the same sense. So when someone is speaking about something, that statement cannot be true and not true. Let's look at an example that will clarify this. Water cannot be frozen and unfrozen at the same time. If you want to see the biblical example, Numbers chapter 23, verse 19, it says, God is not a man that he should lie. So God cannot be both truthful and lying in the same sense. So he is consistently true. Let's look at another example from Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 to 5. Now, serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, so serpent said to the woman, has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Then the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So here the woman said, God said that you shall not eat it, nor you shall touch it, lest you die. And here the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die." So only one is possible. Either you will die or you will surely not die. So we know that this verse basically means that Adam and Eve did not physically die, but they spiritually died. The moment they ate the fruit, they were separated from God. Like we said in the definition, that A cannot be A and not A at the same time. So a statement cannot be both true and not true at the same time and in the same sense. So that is the law of non-contradiction. Let's look at the second one, which is the law of identity. Definition says whatever is. In other words, if a thing is A, then it is A. That is the essence. If a thing exists, then it exists. That's an existence. If a statement is true, then it is true. It's a truth value. In other words, the example, a chair is a chair. A chair cannot be a table. So a chair is a chair. Now, the biblical example in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, God said, "I am who I am." So God identifies himself with a perfect self consistency. His being is identical to himself, never changing or contradictory. Let's look at the third one, which is called the law of excluded middle. The definition is everything must either be or not be. In other words, a thing is either A or not A. That's an essence. A thing either exists or does not exist. It's an existence. A statement cannot be both true and not true at the same time and in the same sense. That's a truth value. For example, light is either on or off, right? So light cannot be either on and off at the same time. So it is either on or off. A biblical example we can see is Jesus used that in Matthew chapter 12, verse 30. Jesus said, "Whoever is not with me is against me." So, in other words, either you are with me or you are against me. You cannot be both at the same time. So Jesus presents a clear excluded middle here. One is either for him or against him. There is no neutral ground here. Let's look at the second example from the same chapter, verse 33. Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or else make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For a tree is known by its fruit. So either a tree is good or the tree is bad, right? So either a fruit is good or the fruit is bad. A fruit cannot be good or bad at the same time, or a tree cannot be good or bad at the same time. So, in other words, a thing is either A or not A. So, these are the three laws of logic. The first one we saw is the law of non contradiction, that says that A cannot be A and not A. Then we saw the law of identity, that basically says A is A, right? A chair is chair. Then we saw the third one, the law of excluded middle. Either A is A or not A, right? A light is either on or off. I hope this episode has helped you understanding these basic fundamental laws of logic, the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, and law of excluded middle. These laws we use in our day-to-day life. Sometimes we use it, but we are not aware that we are using this logic. So next time when someone makes a statement, you can clearly identify some of these laws of logic. When you know these laws of logic, you will be able to find out the bad reasoning and some of the fallacies. One of the book that I would suggest on this topic is the book called Socratic Logic by Peter Kraft. There is another book by Dr. Geisler, which is Come Let Us Reason. So I hope this podcast has helped you understanding these basic fundamental laws of logic. I hope that these laws of logic help us to be better apologists. If you are an apologist, it helps you make sound reasoning. and it also helps during the evangelism. When someone presents a bad argument, you will be able to easily identify by using the laws of logic. Thank you and God bless.